Just going through a bunch of YouTube videos out there from some of the YouTubers that I follow, and I was absolutely amazed by some of the things that I am hearing out there. It's very much the mainstream media propaganda information that is being regurgitated out there time and time and time again, and I really understand why. I do, right? It's because most people do not take enough time to dive deep enough into the Federal Reserve itself to understand the monetary policy. They go through a lot of assumptions of the way that the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves based on what it is that they had learned from the past. And it makes a lot of sense once you have understood the Federal Reserve and how it is that they conduct themselves, especially with the Fed funds rate and the interest rate adjustments and how it is that they conduct themselves with the banking system. All this stuff makes a lot of sense. And once you learn it, you kind of understand it and you just know how it works. And then when you start seeing the things that come out on the mainstream media with the statements coming from the Federal Reserve and stuff like that, you just incorporate this old understanding of what you have of the Federal Reserve into the new information that is being deployed through the propagandized information delivered through the mainstream media. And a lot of times people are saying, no, I can read between the lines, right? I can see what they are truly saying when I watch this. I'm not listening to the talking heads. I'm listening to the individual words of some of these people or something like that. I very much disagree. I very much disagree. And the reason why I think that most people are missing it is because 99% of the people out there are believing in a 2% target for the Federal Reserve, like as if the Federal Reserve is attempting to try and get inflationary scenario to a 2% target in which that they can then point at a number and say, look, inflation is 2%. That is what 99% of the people are believing out there, and it is very difficult to then use the information that they are delivering with that strategy in mind, because that is inaccurate. It is an inaccurate way of looking at the Federal Reserve and how it is that they are doing things. Now, I have been unwavering on this since I have read it back in 2018 that the Federal Reserve absolutely needed an inflationary scenario to take place in order to save their monetary policy. I have shown many times throughout the years, through the documents of the Federal Reserve itself, how it is that they are doing this, why they are doing it. And now I find it very important that at this time, we have to listen to what it is that's being said out there when we have this propagandized information that is delivering a credible threat. I don't know how many people are asking me now what I think about the tax cuts or the tariffs, or it just goes on and on. All these possibilities that could be coming from the future administration or from the administration and their future efforts on what it is that's going to take place. And I think to myself, man, this is all credible threats until it actually happens, until we see what it is that's being deployed, until we see what workarounds, what exemptions take place. Until we actually see that stuff, it is all credible threats, and it works incredibly well. Right? It works very, very well. However, to understand from a position in which that you will then be unwavering, like meaning that you do not flip-flop on it, is the understanding that the Federal Reserve absolutely needed that inflationary scenario, and they needed it moderately above 2% for some time. They have no mathematical formula for figuring it out, and they do not have any change to that strategy as of yet. So this is important to understand, because most people, if you go and listen to most economists out there over the last 4 years, they've had no clue about what it is that's going to happen with inflation. I don't know how many people came to me and said that there's a hyperinflationary scenario, the dollar is done. The dollar did nothing but get stronger over the last few years. Comparatively to a basket of world currency, it is doing far better now than just about any time in history. In fact, if you look at it, there's only been a couple of times in history that it was higher than it is today. This is something that nobody had predicted, except for a handful of people who are understanding that the demand for dollars outside of the United States is far bigger than what anybody could ever possibly imagine. Brent Johnson and Jeff Snyder talk about it extensively. Those guys are incredibly understanding of the dollar milkshake theory and the euro dollar and what it is that impacts the dollar to cause it to go stronger. And again, people thought for sure the dollar was cooked, it was done, it was gone, right? But that's not the case. Going and looking at the Federal Reserve statement on long run strategies, right, which has not yet changed. This long run strategy, as far as what it is that they are doing with their monetary policy, is still very much part of the strategy today, has not changed, and it's been in place for going on 5 years now. They are at this moment going through the meetings, the process of delivering a new strategy statement. However, the old one, this is the statement on long run goals and monetary policy strategy, says this: in order to anchor long term inflation expectations at this level, talking about the 2% target, the committee seeks to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, and therefore judges that following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. Now, I don't know how many times I have stated that on this channel. I have committed that to my understanding of what has taken place within the Federal Reserve and the strategies that are being delivered right now. And now I look out there at so many different YouTubers, economists, and people trying to predict the future, and every single one of them seems to be flip-flopping. They have no clue of what it is that's taken place. They have no clue about the Federal Reserve strategy. They do not understand that they are trying to achieve an inflationary scenario that is exactly where we are today, moderately above 2%. Right? How many people out there are committing themselves to an understanding that when the Federal Reserve lowers rates, that's going to be somehow awesome for the economy? Do people not realize that when the Federal Reserve is lowering rates, that is a sign that there is bad things taking place? And this is obvious when you look at what happened with the Federal Reserve and their delivering of the propagandized information talking about lowering interest rates at the end of 2023 with use of the dot plot, had everybody predicting lower rates, super excited about it. It actually lowered the rates. Mortgage rates came down. And it wasn't until the Federal Reserve actually delivered lower Fed funds rates that we saw the reverse happen and interest rates started moving up, completely against what everybody had believed and predicted out there. I don't know how many times on my channel that I tried to tell people, don't worry about the rate cuts themselves. Look at the information that is being delivered and how it is that people are responding to it. People at the end of 2023 were so excited about it. They were so excited about having lower interest rates going into the future that it actually started lowering rates because they believed it so well. The moment that the Fed cut rates, people looked at that and said, that's a bad sign. That's a bad thing that's taken place. And when they saw that bad thing taking place, they started demanding more return on their money. And you saw the interest rates start to move up. Quite opposite of what it is that people were believing. If you just step back for a second and think, well, the Federal Reserve wants elevated inflation. They want an inflation rate that is moderately above 2% for some time. They want higher interest rates. They are delivering that into the economy, regardless of the Fed funds rate. The actuality of the situation is being delivered to the economy with higher rates. This higher rates is starting to raise the neutral interest rate. Once that neutral interest rate has been elevated, the Federal Reserve has regained their ammunition because now they can take their Fed funds rate far enough below neutral to actually stimulate the economy. They are in no position to do that. Not as of yet. So long as there's an inflation expectation going into the future, which is being delivered right now, think about all the statements that are coming. Think about what was being said at Davos and how inflationary that could be. That is the propaganda. That is the credible threat. That is the gold machine. That gold machine that Ben Bernanke talked about and how to prevent deflation from ever occurring. It's working so well right now. And the more I go out there and I try to absorb some of the information coming from some of these other guys out there, which I know is good. It's good stuff. Like, these guys are incredibly intelligent people. I mean, I've met them personally. And when I listen to their videos, I'm thinking, you guys got like so, you guys know so much more than I do, but yet you don't incorporate this. Why? You know, I mean, I see the stuff that they're talking about. I see the talks about the tariffs and the talks about, bringing manufacturing back and all this other stuff. And I listen to all these things of the possibilities that could come. And I think to myself, man, people are using that information right now. And how does that actually interact within the economy itself? Nothing has happened yet. None of those things take place, but yet the reaction from the people does take place. And the reality does occur from it. Right? It may not be the reality that they were anticipating, but there is a reality that comes. And so to understand it from that point of view makes it very different from what other people are looking at. Most people are looking at it as if they are flying by the seat of their pants, like have no idea of what it is that they're doing. Is because that's their understanding of it. That's their misunderstanding of it. And because they understand the Federal Reserve as well as they do from the past history of research and education, they are totally missing this understanding of the new strategy statement because they're stuck in the old ways, which is accurate to the belief system of it, but it's not accurate to the actual strategy of it. The Federal Reserve and how it is that they are conducting themselves is no longer through those interest rate adjustments, which so many people are focused in on. It is now the words that they use, the credible threats, the expectations of the future, and how it is that that information is being delivered and the reactions that the people have from that actually has results within the economy that is achieving what it is that the Federal Reserve is looking for. Over and over again, I bring this stuff up, but I find it very frustrating when people say, man, you should listen to this other economist out there. He has some really good ideas. And when I listen to him, none of this stuff comes up. And if you're not incorporating this into the idea of it, then you're missing it. The stuff that they are saying is incredibly intelligent, high-level stuff, far beyond what it is that I could even understand when it comes to breaking down the Federal Reserve's action, but it's all outdated. It's like that information would have been super awesome 10 years ago. But since they have changed the way that they conduct themselves after hitting the lower bound of zero and knowing that the adjustment of Fed funds rate was no longer the effective tool, but the communication about it was going to be, now I see things very differently from everybody else. Literally everybody else. Because if anybody was to incorporate, like I even see where some people will even throw the idea of like forward guidance and signaling out there, but they just throw it as like this nonchalant, kind of little tweaking tool that they got there, right? But then they miss how profound that understanding of it really was for them when they talk about the actions that happened prior to the Federal Reserve due to the fact that the communication was delivered so efficiently. Like literally, I'm watching a video where the guy talks about the signaling, the forward guidance, shows where the interest rates were coming down, then shows how the Federal Reserve actually started to move, and that the action coming from the Federal Reserve predicting what it is, or the people's prediction of what it is that the Federal Reserve was going to do, was the main action. That delivered the interest rate cut. The Federal Reserve came in, and then hardly anything happened after that. Look at mortgage rates. They moved before the Federal Reserve did, and they topped out far before the Federal Reserve was done raising rates. They worked independently. People thought that the Federal Reserve was in charge of these mortgage rates. They're not even close, right? Mortgages are working off of the market, working off of market demand for those mortgages, how much they're willing to let go of their capital to buy a mortgage. Not an individual taking out a mortgage. I'm talking an investor to buy somebody else's mortgage, their payment that they're going to make to them. How much they're willing to let go of their capital for that mortgage. Right? And when they said, hey, man, that's my price and that's the interest rate that I'm looking for, the Federal Reserve was not in charge of that. Right? They can influence it in a lot of ways, but they're not in charge of it. All right, 15 minutes into it. I'm going to give it like another 5-10 minutes. The sheep are being primed. They really are, All right, they just killed off 2 million chickens. Well, yeah, but that's not the first time they do that. And you know how long it takes to raise a hen, right? 6 months. 6 months you can have a lay and pull it. Right? I mean, they start laying really good, after about 8 months. But really, you got 6 months it takes to raise a bird. So in 6 months, you can have full production of eggs back. right? I mean, maybe it'll take a little bit longer than that, but for the most part, that's how long it takes. 21 days to incubate an egg. 6 months later, you have eggs, right? So, yeah, it sucks when you have a big die-off like that, but it's not that hard to return. All right. At what point is a revolution on the table? Boxes all around. 2 million chickens is a drop in the bucket. Yeah, it really is. All right, I feel so dumb. How did I not know it took 6 months? I don't know. All right. You know how long it takes to raise a meat bird? One of those chickens, you got like, oh man, look at this big, beautiful chicken breast. You know that came from a 2-month-old bird? Right? Like, you know what's crazy? Most people never have the opportunity to do this, but I've done it several times, where you buy a heritage breed bird for laying purposes, like a laying hen, right? This is like what you would see on the farm. Rhode Island Reds, Barred Rocks, all the little chickens that you would expect to be on a farm. Then you have meat birds. Now, these are a hybrid bird. A lot of people want to say they're genetically modified or engineered or something of that nature. Hey, that's a great story. That's not the case. These things were developed way back in the day, long before the idea of genetically modified organisms and stuff like that. They're a hybrid bird, right? They're a cross between a Cornish bird and a rock chicken. And these hybrid birds grow at an incredible rate. Now, they're a terminal breed, meaning that they would never exist in nature, and that even if they were to be let to live, they would essentially grow to the point they would pin themselves to the ground because of how big they get, and they would probably die of heart disease, heart attacks, or something of that nature. It's a sad story, but once these birds are hatched, they have a timeline to them that they can only exist for so long before they eventually have to go through the processing point and turn into the food supply. Now, having understand this, watching two little birds grow to 2 months old, and you have one that is tiny, it's still peeping, it's like just this little tiny chick, and the other one's this 8-pound bird, right? Or even bigger than that. The intensity of how fast they grow is alarming to watch. Like, you could almost watch it happen. When they get to about 6 weeks old, these birds eat and drink like ungodly amounts, and they grow super fast in the last 2 weeks of their life before you have to go through the processing of it. But yeah, understanding where your food comes from and how that food is made is really important, because there's simply not enough food to go around the world. Now, here in the United States, we enjoy, quite a bit of food here, and for the most part, we don't suffer through massive starvations like they would in other locations in the world. But that doesn't make it easy, because food essentially becomes a luxury, as the rich are the ones who can afford it, and everybody else has to suffer with cutbacks or less nutrition or whatever is happening within their life that they can't afford it. So food is very much a luxury in that sense, but here in the United States, we have an abundance amount of it. All right, moving on. I'm going to give it like another 5-10 minutes here, and then we're going to call it quits. All right. Do you ever think of the cost of raising birds and animals and an environmental cost, water, feed? Isn't it just better to create our food? Well, I mean, as an individual, create our own food? Yeah, I mean, well, it's even better just to go get it out of the wild, let nature create it, right? And then we can just be part of nature, and we're just another, part of that whole process. The only thing with that is that you're only going to have a certain amount of people that can live in that side of that, because nature can only provide enough food for so many people, and then those people naturally have to die off from starvation just because the land simply can't support those people. We learned this from even the Cantillon essay describing here in the United States how the Native Americans would fight these fierce battles over hunting grounds, because simply not all of them can live there. There's not enough food running around to feed everybody. So you have to battle over territory. And that's essentially the economy. It only gets more complicated from there, but that is the basis of an economy, is like fighting over hunting grounds. I don't like, you can just make it more complicated from that point. Add agriculture to it, you can feed more people. Once you got more people, now you need governance. If you have governance, well, then you got power over people. And then you see how it just keeps building and building from there. Organ replacement from stem cell. Cop, what does that say? Cap human organ harvesting days are limited. Insurance and stem cells. Okay, data is the new oil. Growing lots of garlic this winter. Too many vampires around. Yeah. Food is an asset just like anything else. I don't think it's an asset. I think it's a necessity. I think there's a difference inside of it. Can be an asset, right? I mean, especially if you have it, but it's also a necessity if you don't. So you're going to starve. There's assets out there that you can live your entire life without having, but necessities aren't that way. All right. So if we can feed the whole world, no matter how many people there are, will that solve our problem? Well, yeah, M Rider 777. Jeez. Wealth is defined by three things, right? I don't know how many people realize this, but wealth is three things: food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. That's it, right? Food, conveniences, pleasures of life. Now that comes down to no matter what situation you're in, everything else is luxurious experience no matter how you look at it. So when you think about food and you think about the conveniences and you think about the pleasures of life, food is the number one thing that is a necessity. You absolutely have to have it. After that, conveniences and pleasures of life, that's all a matter of opinion, right? I mean, I think about it. To me, I can't think of anything I would really want in my life. I love to have a new Camaro. That would be awesome. I'd love to go vacationing all over the world and just checking that out. Once you got those two things, what difference does it make, right? And I mean, traveling might be, you can continue on with those experiences as you go to new places. But once you have the Camaro, like, okay, that's cool. After a couple of months, it'd be like, yeah, it's my car. Who cares? So it's not like those things, those wealth comes from like having the ability to buy a car. The ability to do it is one thing. Having the car is like, whatever. If you have the ability to do it, you feel it. You feel wealthy about it, and then the car isn't as important anymore. It's the ability to buy the car that's important. So understanding that wealth really is food. That's it. And your access to it and how quality and how much of it and all that other stuff. Everything else is just a superficial thing. Convenience, maybe, right? Got the house, that's convenient. I see people living in a car. I met a guy who doesn't have a place to live. He was so rich, he just travels all over the place. He doesn't, it's like, I don't have any place. I just go wherever I want, stay in hotels, stay with friends, stay wherever. Like he just independently wealthy and had no place to live. He just travel around, just go wherever he wanted. And I'm thinking, he uses the convenience of the world, right? Like he doesn't have to have a car. He doesn't have to have a house. He doesn't have to have anything. A duffel bag full of clothes. That's it, right? And even in that sense, if you're that rich, you don't even really have to have that. You can just buy new clothes wherever you go. So understanding that wealth is really an opinion. It's a state of mind. It's not really anything physical, and a lot of people want to put it that way. They want to give it meaning in that fashion, but that's not it. Access to food. How easy is that access to food, and what kind of food are you eating? Like, I think about it, man. Like, I think, what would be the awesome state? Like, if I was to be in a perfect place, what would that be? Like, what would that look like? And I think it would have a nice meal, right? I love ribeyes, so a decently cooked ribeye, a nice view, and music. And after that, it's like, whatever. It would just be like, a little bit more pleasurable experience beyond that. And that's all I really want. And I think to myself, that doesn't really cost that much money. So wealth to me isn't a matter of the money. It's a matter of the state of mind that you're in about it. You know? And so if you could feed everybody, then everybody would be wealthy. Right? And access to food, that isn't that hard. Like I remember when I was the brokest, when I had the least amount of money, in the most debt, and had the least options going on in my life. I was living on a little hobby farm. We were growing our own food, trading it with other people, and I never ate so good. Like to me, that was like the best I had ever eaten. It was the best food. I felt the best. It was, everything about it was awesome. And I had the least amount of money at that time. Inflation above 2% is a problem for only those that really are affected by it, meaning having enough money to afford buy is a luxury. Do you agree? I mean, well, yeah, right? The only time it's ever a problem is when you're limited. That's where most people end up suffering the most, is because they feel limited in their life. They don't feel abundant. And understanding that abundance is everywhere, including your limitations. Like if you are lacking, you are an abundant and lacking, right? I mean, just to understand that there is nothing but abundance out there in the entire world. And most people put it on themselves, that they, in their subconscious, not realizing that they're even doing it to themselves, and it's probably because of the way that they grew up, is that they limit themselves. I'm not deserving of it. I don't have access to it. I don't, there's other people who are better than, or for whatever reason, they look at themselves in a way that says, I am diminished, I am devalued, I am less worthy of something of like that. And therefore, because they have that subconscious belief and that's the way they think about it, especially when they put blame on externals, like, it's the government's fault, it's, banking's fault, it's, society's fault. When you do this sort of behavior, the subconscious will deliver. It'll be like, it's like it can't help it. The universe will then align to your subconscious and say, yeah, you're right. Your ego is absolutely right. We will deliver exactly what you believe it is that you deserve. And that's what happens to most people. And it's why they end up suffering the most. And you can find it like, the people who are struggling the hardest are the ones who then point the finger at somebody else and say it's their fault. Right? They're the ones who struggle the most. It is the people who recognize what it is that's going on within themselves to say, man, it is me who is the common denominator in this situation who needs to change, because there is other people out there right now who are absolutely killing it. And there's no reason why I can't share in that same abundance that they are going after. The only limitation is me and what it is that I am doing and my beliefs. Most people don't recognize that. That's sad, right? And I know this because this was my major problem when that I had to come across. It was that aha moment at 40 years old that says, man, you think that maybe you ought to quit drinking and maybe start thinking more positive about, your outlook on life and some of these things. And you know what? After 8 years of doing that, it actually changed around, man. It was like, oh, hey, look, I'm not broken, dead, don't have, things going on in my life. All of a sudden I have opportunities, and it seems to be everywhere. And nothing really changed except for the way that I'm thinking about things and the way that I conduct myself. Most poor people are billionaires. Pure capitalism is doing anything to increase your capital. Buying the government is a good way to do that. Yeah. I guess so. Yep, blame the others. Well, that's really how it ends up going down. I mean, blaming other people for blaming the external for your problems means that you have an expectation of other people to do something that is then going to make your life better. And I find that to be odd, right? Is that you don't like people who say that they don't expect themselves to change the way that they are doing things. They want to conduct themselves exactly the way they are doing it today, and then hope for the entire world to line up to them. Right? I know this is the way I was. This is the way I thought. Right? This is my own egotistical mind talking back when I, prior to being 40 years old while still drinking. This is what I truly believed. This is like the world is screwed up. If it was working itself differently, my life would be awesome. I wouldn't have to change. Right? And then I realized that ain't gonna happen, right? I mean, it finally, dawned on me. It was just like after a decade of thinking this way, it was just like, nobody else is cluing in on the whole New World Order thing. You know that, right? Like you're the only one. You're talking, running around with a tinfoil hat. And I kind of realized it was just like there is no point in trying to change somebody else's mind about world government and all the stuff that was happening. There was no point of it. It wasn't going to work. And so instead, I started focusing in on what it is that I could do in my own life that could then understand how it is that I can position myself. And I thought, man, maybe I should share some of this stuff instead. Like how it is that the Federal Reserve is actually conducting themselves, some of the understandings of how it is that the Fed funds rates work, how it is that the whole history of economic theories and forces can be playing out even today. even though it has differences to it, considering that some of these economic forces were discovered 5, 6, 700 years ago or even more. But yet you can find evidence of those economic forces playing out today. Understanding these things has given me a much better position in the way that I conduct myself. Now I find that I have a savings. Now I find that I can load up on assets. Now I find that I have business opportunity. I'm finding that there are things that most people are looking at in this world, in this economy, as being deteriorated and difficult to do. I find it actually not that hard. Like, I mean, it's hard. You have to be consistent. You have to be out there every single day. You have to be dedicated to the process of it. But it's not like it's hard, right? I mean, there's nothing like, I mean, working the oil fields, that's hard, right? Logging the trees and doing stuff like that, that's hard work. Going out there and putting out effort every single day and being consistent in that, that's not that hard to do. You know, it's hard to be dedicated. It's hard to like do it every single day, especially on those days that you don't want to, you're not feeling good or whatever. But you look beyond that and it's just like, it's just this day. Of course I don't feel good today. All right. I'm not going to feel awesome every single day. If I don't, if I could only perform on the days that I felt just completely awesome, how many days is that going to be? Like 2 or 3 times a year? I mean, I show up every day and I just feel normal. It's just a normal day. I sometimes come out and I look excited on my videos, but I'm trying to put the energy into it. But this is a very normal process for me. This is something that we do every single day. All right. Okay, guys, I'm going to call it quits. Half an hour into this video, kind of just babbling on. It was a great one, though. All right, effing awesome soundtrack. All right. Simon, how was opening night? Oh, thank you, Deja Vu. It was awesome. It went off without a hitch. It was so good. So again, it was 3 plays, 3 one-acts plays that were taking place, and ours was the final one, and it was great. I don't think it was quite a packed, like completely full house, but I think most of the seats were filled. And I'm guessing, I don't know, 50, 60 people or something had attended. And it was really good. I mean, we went through the entire play, all the lines, no mess ups, nobody forgot their lines, nobody screwed up. It was just a very smooth, awesome show, and it went great. Looking forward to doing it again tonight and tomorrow afternoon, and then again next week and the following week. So we got 8 more shows to do. If you're interested in checking out the show, it's at 1015 Theater in Astoria. There will be Friday, Saturday evening performances and a Sunday matinee, and then again, it'll run for like 3 weeks. So just go check out 1015 Theater in Astoria. You can find the website and go and get your tickets for that. But it was a great time, yeah. Yui, have you seen egg inflation 217% in a month? Yeah, but that's not inflation. That's like a supply chain breakdown that's happening. Inflation is the destruction. Okay. Let's just talk about it real quick, right? Inflation is the expansion of money and credit. Now, what ends up happening when you expand money and credit is that the people who have access to that money start to spend it. Now, if you have people who have access to that money from all channels, then they'll spend that money in all ways, all at once, very much like the stimulus packages that were handed out. However, if you have a situation in which that all of a sudden you have a breakdown in the supply chain, that's not necessarily a destruction of dollar value or any decision made by any kind of banking system. This is a supply chain breakdown. So to call it an inflationary scenario inside of that is really disingenuous, considering once the supply comes back, all the inflation will just disappear. So was that really dollar destruction, or was the supply demand issues that were happening? Right? Supply and demand issues. Where does inflation really come from? It comes from the supply demand issues. However, it's the supply demand issue that is consistent, that all of a sudden finds an increase in demand, not a lack of supply, that creates the inflationary scenario, as supply now has to ramp up to meet the demand. Now, in order for you to really understand the inflationary scenario through the Federal Reserve's eyes, is you have to think about it. When the Federal Reserve would lower interest rates, this would spark people to go out there and buy houses, cars, and go on vacation. I've said this many times, but this isn't necessarily exactly what is happening, as the Federal Reserve is really hoping that there will be corporate management investment into that. Meaning that if the interest rates come down, they will borrow money. When they borrow money, they deploy that money into the economy, building equipment, hiring people. You start hiring people, more people start to increase their wages. That increase in wages and more jobs that are being created at the time then turn into more demand as the people who now have extra money, and I use extra money, but there's no such thing as extra money, right? Now these people who have money that they didn't have before are starting to deploy that money into the economy through consumption. The added consumption creates the supply-demand imbalances, and this is really where you find inflation. It's not necessarily from dollar destruction. Now you can look at it from dollar destruction, and that is fine. Right? I mean, you can say, hey, they print up all the money, dollar goes down. What else do you need to look at? Well, that's a great story to tell again, except that that doesn't excuse lumber, oil, and silver and many other commodities out there that are not sitting anywhere near their all-time highs, but yet we have an elevated amount of money out there in the system. So when I look at the great financial crisis and I think about quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failing to produce the inflationary scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for, even though they had expanded the balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion, all that money printing didn't produce the inflationary scenario that the Fed was looking for. Why? Because most of that money ended up sitting in the big bank's balance sheet, and unless that money was borrowed and deployed into the economy, it didn't do anything as far as chasing goods and services. So just a simple printing of money causes inflation is very inaccurate. That's not right. And to even look at eggs right now and say, hey, they're up 217% due to inflation, that's not right either, right? That is not an inflationary scenario taking place. That is a supply-demand breakdown or supply breakdown versus the demand that is out there. Once the supply comes back, all the inflation disappears. That's not that's not a good way to look at it. Money printer go burr, prices go up on eggs. Well, no, that's not right. Alrighty, guys. Supply is one thing. Inflation is another. If supply of eggs comes back, do you think business will drop prices back down? Yes, they do. What are you talking about? That's exactly what happened back when eggs shot up prior, right? This isn't the first time. We did an egg story not too long ago about this exact thing. When egg supply came back, boom, prices fell, right? And it's going to happen again. I mean, absolutely it will. All right, I had 12 egg layers, 4 kids. A player can only do so many egg bakes. Yeah. All righty, guys. This was fun, but I got to go. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.